wet coal and iron air. Frost Gulch stamps a bride too small until Boone Calder measures by work, not inches. A silver M on a shelf, Deacon Voss's deed wore, a night fire, a porch school. Walk with Mercy Pike to where the frontier learns its last truth. Home is where the cold stops outside. The depot at Frost Gulch lay white as bone, the air salted with wet coal and iron. A warped signboard worried its nail and squeaked on each shove of wind. When the train sighed itself empty, Mercy Pike stepped down like a person trying not to make a sound, one hand tight on a frayed handkerchief, the other on a letter gone soft from being read too many times. Snow came crossways. It slicked her hat brim, then clawed it clean off. Mercy chased 2 steps, caught the crown against a drift, dusted it with the back of her glove. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. The telegraph in the office ticked like a grasshopper in a jar. Fretful, non-stop. A boot-black kid under the overhang matched Mercy's short stride for a moment and grinned at nothing. A cornbread widow with flour on her sleeves clicked her tongue and said to no one, "Mail order sent back, looks like." Mercy tucked the handkerchief deeper into her sleeve and put the letter into her coat, the wax scar a small cold under her palm. He came up out of the steam, Deacon Voss, hat fine enough to pretend the weather was for other people. His eyes walked her from hat to heel and never found what they wanted. "You're small," he said, like he'd discovered a crack in a barrel. "Too small to be useful where the wind stays up." He raised 2 fingers toward the agent. "Ticket east. I'll see it paid. No sense dragging this out." Mercy's mouth went dry. She managed, "You wrote of a home." It sounded like a line from a book that had left town. Voss didn't shrug. He let the cold do it for him. Homes cost work. I asked for someone who could carry her side. Best we stop here." The bootblack kid laughed into his scarf. The widow adjusted a pan of cornbread cooling on the sill and shook her head again, softer this time, like it was a shame but not a surprise. The wind slapped the door. Mercy set her hat, squared nothing more than 5 feet of bone and will, and tried to steady the tremor in her breath. Hank Waverly, broad as a haystack and black with forge smoke, had been watching from the shade of the freight scale. He spat into the snow, missing everything important, and said rough as a hinge, "Wind don't measure a soul." No one argued with Hank. No one ever did. But the words didn't fetch Mercy a place to stand. Voss turned a little, already losing interest, and said, "Agent'll have you on the next eastbound. I've done right by you," as if kindness were something that could be signed and filed. Mercy nodded once, because nodding was cheaper than speaking. She slid the letter deeper, felt the wax again, and saw the careful loops of a man who wrote better than he meant. The telegraph ticked, faster, the sound hurrying past her like all the lives that were not hers. She stepped aside of the door and let a brakeman haul a trunk through. Snow squealed under the iron edges. A gust pushed her back a half step and she took it, then took the next forward on purpose. She watched the steam lift and thin, the train settling like a beast going to sleep. Voss was already talking to someone else about feed prices and fences, as if no one had been returned to sender in front of him. Mercy lifted her chin. The handkerchief's hem had come unstitched at the corner. She worried the loose thread with her thumb until it broke clean. She folded the cloth once, then again, making it small enough for the pocket where she kept things she refused to lose. "Ma'am," the agent said, holding out the paper for a signature. Mercy looked at the paper as if it were a map to a country where she had never been welcome. The cold found the gap at her collar and reached down her spine. She let it. She stepped back from the counter. "No," she said, voice low but whole. "Not today." The agent blinked. The kid stopped grinning. The widow's mouth softened around the word mercy, like it had been waiting to do that all morning. Hank grunted something that might have been a blessing or just a piece of gravel shifting in his chest. Outside, the wind hauled another load of snow across the tracks. Mercy set her hat in the weather and stood there long enough to feel the sting wash and settle. She wasn't freight, she told herself. She wasn't something that could be weighed and sent back. Shame had teeth, but so did resolve, and one of them would have to eat. She turned from the counter and the ticket and the man who had measured her wrong. The platform boards creaked under her light step. Somewhere a door opened to warmth and stove light, and somewhere a soul barked once and went quiet. Mercy faced the white town and the long country beyond it, and did not move aside when the wind asked her to. She was still facing the white of town when a shape came off the porch shadow, tall and plain as a fence post set true. The man didn't clear his throat or announce himself with bustle. He just pushed a drift off the step with the side of his boot, took the broom from the jam, and swept snow slow and steady, like a person who fixes small things first. The old dog at his heel, Blue, shifted to block the wind from Mercy without making a show of it. "Need work?" the man asked, voice low, sanded down by weather rather than temper. Mercy turned. The brim of his hat carried its own dust, not borrowed from a catalog. His coat had been mended by a careful hand. He was neither smiling nor measuring her the way the other had. He held the broom a moment longer, set it back into the corner like it mattered where it lived, then stepped down beside her. She could still feel the telegraph ticking. In the bones of the depot behind her, an impatient insect that would not be swatted. "I need a place not counting the inches of me," she said, surprised at how even that sounded. He gave a small nod, like a horse trader acknowledging a fair price. "Name's Boone Calder." He didn't offer a hand. He offered a sentence that weighed more. "You ain't freight, you're a person. Work honest, pay honest." Blue blew a dog sigh and leaned his weathered shoulder into Mercy's skirt. She steadied on him as if he were a rail. Boone shrugged out of his wool coat and set it over Mercy's shoulders without asking permission or making it a debt. The weight of it was not heavy so much as decided. Warmth climbed in slow, sure inches. The wind tested the new arrangement and gave it up. "Not much to look at out my way," Boone said, "but a roof holds the same pretty or plain." Mercy looked once toward the counter where a paper had been made ready with her name bent wrong on it. The agent had set it aside as if it were a jar waiting for a label. The slot of door showed stove light and men already telling the next hour's talk. Voss had vanished into it like a nail into a post, still there, not worth pointing at. "All right," Mercy said. She wasn't sure if it came from her lungs, or the cold, or someplace older. She folded the frayed handkerchief over her wrist like a cuff, and drew Boone's coat closer at the throat. Boone tipped his hat the barest angle to the agent, in a way that closed the matter without words. He stepped down to the rutted street, took Mercy's valise as if it might be full of china or nothing at all, and slung it behind his saddle. He didn't look her over. He looked to his horse's cinch and then to the sky. Like a man who knew which one would change first, they walked the horses to keep us heat in their legs. Frost Gulch fell behind them in boards and smoke. The signboard quit squeaking as the depot's noise thinned to a memory. Hoof iron bit the packed snow with a clean, measured sound. Leather ticked at each stride. Blue loped a little ahead, then doubled back to check both of them, satisfied with what he found. Past the last hitch rail, the land opened up the way a book opens when you've learned the trick of it. Fences went long and low into cottony distance. Willows along the creek wore ice scabs that caught the weak sun and threw it back proud. Mercy rode with both hands on the horn at first, then let one hand fall to her thigh, and trusted the horse to believe in the trail. Boone set an easy pace. the kind that could go all day and arrive where it meant to. "Cold's honest," Boone said after a while, not to fill the air but to lay one truth on top of another. "It takes what you don't use." Mercy breathed into the collar of his coat and counted the beats of her own heart until they steadied. Blue trotted in the lee of Boone's horse, ears pricked at nothing particular. Mercy watched her breath shred and drift and make nothing of itself, and for once that did not feel like a warning. The town settled behind them. The country stood up. Mercy set her eyes where the road went soft into white and gave the wind nothing it had not already taken. Forward was not a grand word, but it was the one she had. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. By the time they dropped off the ridge, the world had gone the color of pewter. Bare birches along the bend clacked their thin bones, and Bitter Willow Creek wore ice scabs that took the light like old tin. Boone swung the gate wide with a mittened hand and let Mercy ride through first. The place was plain, a two-room house set square to the wind, a low shed, a stall lean-to stitched from mismatched boards. Smoke lifted thin, then folded back as if it too was tired. Inside, the stove put a gold square on the floor. The room smelled of coffee gone a little bitter and wool drying on a chairback. Boone hung his hat on a nail polished by the same habit, then showed Mercy the business of the place in a sentence at a time. Where the bucket lived, where the kindling sat, how the flue stuck unless you eased it with the heel of your hand. He didn't hover. He let her learn the angles. Mercy set the bucket by the door, tugged her gloves, and stepped back into the teeth of it. The Wells rope burned through her mitts and left a damp chill against her palm. She knocked ice from the lip with the dipper's edge and listened to the hollow slap of water in the dark. Back inside, she fed the stove slow so the iron wouldn't complain, stacked kindling like a crib, and felt heat climb the seams of her coat. Blue took his corner by the door and pretended he didn't care where she walked. When she passed, his tail thumped once against the jamb without asking for thanks. Boone set a small sack of oats on the table and said, "We'll mash it thin for the calf. He's not much for this weather." A knuckle rapped the door. Mrs. June Ellery came in without waiting for anyone to lose heat, cheeks red as apples, a towel-wrapped pan in her croissants. "Cornbread while the lard's still honest," she said, laying it on the table with the care of a christening. Her eyes swept Mercy once, kind but not silly. She sniffed the air, caught the thread of burnt pride that still clung from town, and said, soft as wool, "Supper's meanest when pride's the main dish." Mercy found she could breathe easier after that, like someone had loosened one notch on a tight belt. She sliced the cornbread neat and poured tin coffee that steamed against the cold, like it meant to stay. They ate standing, boots melting small commas in the snow blown in across the sill. Boone set the pans aside and walked her out to the stall. The calf lifted its narrow head, eyes wet as buttons. Mercy measured mash with her hand, slow and certain, as if the animal would grade her for it. When she bent to muck the straw, the forked teeth zinged against a rock frozen in the bedding, and she learned the sound at once. The music of work you don't see in books. Back inside, she unbuttoned her coat. On a shelf above the stove, tucked back of a cracked mug, something caught and kept the light. A silver button stamped with an M. Not fancy, not new, just the kind of small thing a person carried for longer than reason. Mercy didn't reach for it. She let her eyes find it again, to be sure it hadn't imagined itself. Boone noticed the stove, not the shelf. He shook the flue free with the heel of his hand, like he'd said, and the smoke settled to obedience. Later, with chores edged off, Mercy stood on the porch and drank the quiet. Across the yard, two small tracks jittered past the corner of the shed. Hank Waverly's kids had cut through, chasing some foolishness they were right to keep. Their steps were all over the place, letters trying to be words. Mercy watched the trail go ragged and felt something click into place, a thought she didn't name yet. A porch, a slate, a few children warmed by a stove square. She tucked it away before the wind could read it. She came back in, propped her damp gloves on the chair back, and fed the stove another careful split. Boone, at the table mending a halter with thread thick as twine, glanced up once, measuring the draft. Not the woman. Blue made a noise like a door easing shut and slept harder. Mercy cleaned the dipper and set it lip down. The room had its own grammar, places where tools belonged, a pace that didn't shame you for learning it. The button on the shelf kept its light and its letter, like a small, closed question. Mercy wasn't a thief of other people's stories, but she'd been hungry for her own. She let the warmth climb, felt her fingers come back to her, and decided she could stand this quiet. Morning came pewter gray and tight with cold. Boone set 3 yard markers in a ragged row where the wind had scoured the drift thin. He checked each post by feel, not fuss, then nodded once toward the saddle tree. "Cinch first." Mercy eased her gloves and slid a hand under the latigo. Leather spoke in little creaks. The horse blew steam across her cheek like a reminder. Boone didn't reach in. He stood where a man stands when he means for someone to learn. "Try it," he said, "but let him breathe." She let the gelding take one deep pull, then shut the cinch again, square this time. A small thing, but the horse said yes by standing still. They walked the ring till Mercy's fingers quit lying about their feeling. Then Boone pointed at the rifle propped against the post. 3-shot drill, slow, clean. He checked the chamber, offered her the stock. The wood was cold enough to pull a wince. He tipped the muzzle downrange, then gave the one line he meant to give. "Don't fight the kick, marry it." Mercy breathed into her cupped hands, blew warmth back into her palms, and took the rifle. The sight found the first marker. The world narrowed, and the wind tried to write excuses across her shoulders. She pressed. The crack rang off the bare birches and came back thinner. The shot sailed high. She reset her feet, found the bead again, and felt the gun go live a blink before it spoke. The second mark survived. On the third, the butt slid wrong in her coat, jammed her collarbone, and the recoil knocked her a clean step sideways. She went down on a knee, then a hand. Snow burned through the glove like salt. Boone didn't move toward her, not stubborn. Respect. Blue moved exactly one pace and put his old nose into Mercy's sleeve, breathing steady like he could loan it. Mercy stared at the bite of cold in her palm. The skin had risen a blister clean and mean. She closed her hand once to feel where it would crack and decided it wouldn't. Yet she stood, slower than pride prefers, and set the stirrup with the edge of her boot to keep the horse honest. Then she picked up the rifle and checked the chamber like Boone had, mouth a straight line. "Again?" she asked. But it wasn't a question that needed an answer. Boone gave the kind of nod a man gives a fence when it holds. They went again. The wind took its tithe. Mercy's shoulder would talk about this day tomorrow, when the 3 shots were spent and the markers stood there like boys who hadn't learned manners. Boone gathered the brass, dropped them into her palm, and left the arithmetic up to her. Inside, the stove chased the ache out of her bones 1 inch at a time. Mercy slit the glove seam with a thumbnail, patched it clumsy but snug with a scrap and 2 crooked stitches. Then she set to the rifle. She wiped the steel till the cloth came back clean, oiled the hinge, rubbed the stock where it had bruised her, and for the first time thought of it as something that might yet meet her halfway. Boone watched with the corner of his eye while he mended a halter. He didn't praise. He didn't need to. Blue lay with his chin on Mercy's boot, as if to claim a share of the day's lesson. Afternoon went thin and silver. They stepped out once more to throw mash and check the tie ropes. Mercy flexed her hand inside the mended glove and found it still hers. The yard lay simple, honest. the kind of ground you could read like a primer if you took your time. When dusk came on, wind sawed through the dead limbs out by the fence and made a tune no one had ordered. From West Ridge, a wolf sent one long note down the hollow. Mercy felt it in the old places where shame had curled this morning. It touched nothing it could own. She shut the door gentle against it, set the rifle in its place, and let the stove write its square of gold on the floor again. The next morning the light came thin and nickel flat, the sun no bigger than a dull silver dollar smudged behind weather. The yard had drifted in places, scoured to hard pan in others, the kind of patchwork a body learns with their feet. Boone set the markers back upright with a boot heel and said nothing he didn't need. Mercy flexed her hand inside the patched glove. The blister had settled into the sort of ache that minds its manners, if you do. They walked the circle once to warm the horses and the truth out of their joints. Boone tipped the rifle from its peg, checked the chamber, and passed it over, stock first. "Same drill," he said, not unkind. "Slow, clean." Mercy let the gun sit in her hands a breath longer than yesterday. She waited for the wind to make its usual argument, and then let it pass. Sight to bead, breath low, shoulders in where the wood meant to live. The first shot cracked, jumped her a half hair, and shaved the marker's edge white. Boone's hat didn't move. The second came easier. It bit the post proper, a neat gray kiss that showed black when the snow shook free. On the third, Mercy remembered the line he'd given her, "Don't fight the kick, marry it," and felt the stock come home of its own will. The world narrowed the way a trail does in bad country, straight and sure because there's nowhere else to go. She pressed. The post splintered with a clean chip. A sound like a yes. Boone gave the smallest nod a man can make, and still mean it. "Not bad," he said. It landed like a warm coin in a cold hand. Mercy found herself smiling before she meant to. "Careful," she said, breath fogging. "Talk like that, and I'll get ideas." "Get useful ones," Boone answered, deadpan. But there was a lighter thing under it. His right hand strayed, almost thoughtless, to the coat pocket where something small and hard rode. His thumb rubbed once at it through the wool. The silver button might as well have winked for the way his eyes shifted. There and gone, a breadcrumb Mercy stored without chasing. Blue trotted out, inspected the chewed edge of the post like a foreman, sneezed at the powder, and circled back to lay his chin on Mercy's boot. She let her knuckles rest on the old dog's head, felt the steady heat of him, and stood a touch straighter in the wind. Work pulled them along the day. In the lean-to, the calf bawled his complaint at the world and its terms. Mercy measured mash with the flat of her palm and worked it with warm water till it went right, not lumpy. The little bull nosed the pan, then her sleeve, and ate like he'd made the recipe. Boone set a hand to the rope halter, cracked knuckles she had wrapped the night before, and checked the tie, as if failure were a stranger not welcome here. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. They walked the fence to the creek where ice scabs stacked in plates. Mercy learned where the drift looks shallow and isn't. Felt the snow take her up to the knee and laughed once, short and real, when she came out on the far side hole. Back at the house, she set the stall door true on its bent hinge, 2 taps and a shim, and it swung square as a hymn. Boone noticed and didn't say so. He just used it and let the praise live in the doing. Inside, the stove got her wet cuffs to steaming. Mercy stacked kindling in a tight crib so the next fire would start polite. She poured tin coffee for both of them and set Boone's cup where his hand would find it without looking. He took it, drank, and stared into the lid of weather like a man reading a ledger only he could see. "You're coming along," he said at last, the words easy as pulling a good nail. Mercy didn't answer quick. She let the sentence settle where the hurt had lived this time yesterday, testing its weight, its fit. Out beyond the window, the wind planed the ridge until it looked carved. She stood there inside Boone's mended coat and the square of stove gold, and the old shape of shame slid another inch off her shoulders. Blue thumped his tail once against the jamb, pleased with the room as it was. Mercy set the cup down, felt the house breathe, and understood just a little how a person might belong through use more than asking. By noon the light had the look of tin hammered thin, and the list on the table said what needed saying. Salt, lamp wicks, a box of nails. Mercy pulled on her mended glove. The blister minded its manners. Boone checked the cinch the way he checked most things. Once, right. Then they rode the ruts back toward Frost Gulch, Blue pacing the lee of Boone's horse until town shouldered up out of the snow. The mercantile held a weather of its own. Damp boards gave underfoot, and the smell of tobacco lived in the wood, sweet and tired. Stove heat pooled around a barrel of seed. Everything else kept a little frost. Mr. Bixby ticked at the telegraph behind his grating, eyes on a message that wasn't theirs. The cornbread widow stood by the calico bolts and did not look twice at Mercy this time. At the counter, Deacon Voss had arranged himself like he belonged to the stove. He didn't turn when they came in. He waited for them to arrive in his story. When Boone set the empty nail tin down soft as a coin, Voss spread a folded deed like a river map, the paper crisp as February. "Clerk says your meridian fence runs wide by near 2 rods, he said. "Survey's sloppy as a drunk's signature. You're grazing where you don't pay." Mercy felt Boone go still beside her, not the kind of still that breaks. He tugged the hem of his coat a finger's width, neat as a man setting a line true. Something hard and small rode that pocket. The wool shifted and caught the light for just a blink. The silver button winking once and gone. Boone's eyes didn't follow it. He reached instead and righted the nail tin Voss had shoveled sideways with his map, setting it square on the scarred counter. "Your hand's shaking, Deacon," said a voice from the back. Deputy Wade Harlan leaned off a barrel with the sort of patience that makes men tell on themselves. He'd been there the whole time, letting the room try its own manners first. Voss pinched the deed with 2 fingers and flattened it hard enough to leave a crease. The tremor ran under the paper like a trapped mouse and settled. He smiled the way men do when a barn's about to fall and they don't own it. "Cold," he said. "Or maybe I'm thinking on how your old man pulled stakes in the thaw of '73 and called it righteous. Lot of balances open in this country. Bank don't take weather for payment." Boone didn't bite. He set a pair of lamp wicks on the counter, then a coil of stove rope, each where they belonged, as if he could square the world by inventory. Mercy shouldered a salt sack clean off the floor and onto her hip. The weight found place and held. Voss looked like a man testing a post with his boot, seeing if it would give. He tapped the deed with one knuckle. "Ink rides farther than a horse," he said, pleasure creeping in. "You'll find that fence where the paper says it is, not where your memory wants it." Wade's face didn't change. He took the deed, turned it sideways, righted it, the way a cowhand checks a saddle before dark. "Paper ain't scripture till a judge says amen," he said. "And even then we still gotta live with each other." He slid the paper back across. "You can file at the county. Meanwhile, keep voices down in the store." The widow coughed into her sleeve. Mr. Bixby's key tapped out somebody else's trouble. Snow fell past the warped windows steady as a sermon. Mercy thought how ink and snow made the same pretty lies if you let them. Voss half turned toward her, not quite able to leave the shape he'd made of her at the depot. He looked her up and down again, the way a trader checks a mule that's already proved itself. Mercy did not look away. She tipped the salt sack a hair to settle it better, as if the only opinion that mattered here belonged to her bones. Boone counted out for the nails. "We're done for today," he said, not to argue, but to end the hour. Voss folded the deed along the new crease, thumb making the line sharp. The tremor didn't show this time. He tucked the paper into his coat, where it rode like a promise he'd made to the wrong god. When he finally spoke, it was quiet, the kind of quiet that carries. "See you at your fence." Wade's hand rested easy near the star on his vest. He didn't bother with a farewell. He didn't have to. Boone gathered the sack and wrapped the tin. Mercy pushed the door with her shoulder and let the weather take them back, the tobacco-laced heat falling off at the threshold. Outside, Blue shook snow out of his ears and took point. The street had gone the gray of pewter again. Even so, Mercy felt the world sharpen into things you could hold. Salt, wicks, nails, and the knowledge that some men bet their lives on paper and others on posts that remember. They mounted. Frost Gulch slid behind them, a board at a time. Boone kept an easy step. Mercy matched it. Between the beats of hoof and leather, she heard the telegraph begin a new story that wasn't theirs, and liked it that way. The cold came down hard the next day, a dry bite that polished every sound. Boone hauled a bundle of posts to the windward edge of the yard and set the first one like a man meant to stay. He tamped snow and gravel with the butt of a shovel, breath slow, no waste. Mercy steadied the post while the earth took it. The wood hummed a little in her gloves, a live thing going quiet. "Law goes slow," Boone said, not looking up. "Work don't. We'll keep both moving." They worked a rhythm. Boone tamped, Mercy trued the plumb by eye. Blue stood where the wind broke and made a wall of himself. When they moved to the lean-to, Mrs. June Ellery came through the gate with her shoulders full of comfort and a sack under one arm. "Here," she said, laying it down, old quilts cut into calf blankets, a handful of clean rags, a crock of tallow. She showed Mercy how to rub life back into a set of cold ears, how to seat a blanket under a belly strap so it wouldn't chafe, the way you talk to a calf so it remembers to keep breathing. Mercy listened with her hands. A calf's ear warmed under her thumb, a small miracle no one would brag on. Mrs. June smiled like a stove finding its draft. "Sing low," she said. "Even a cow knows a lullaby if you keep at it." Hank Waverly tramped in from the forge, cheeks burned red, a loop of something braided and beautiful swinging from in his fist. "Made you a rawhide rayata," he told Mercy, passing it over like a secret. "Basket weave neat, weight just right, not to rope trouble, to practice your hands into remembering." Mercy let the coil settle across her forearm. The weave had a logic you could learn with your fingers. She nodded once. Something grateful lodged too deep for speech. They pushed through chores until the sun banked low. Then Mercy wrapped a message tight and rode in with Blue to the depot. The world shaved thin with light. Mr. Bixby peered over his grating and slid the form across. His key ticked the county seat awake. Mercy stood at the counter and felt the wire carry their corner of the world into someone else's room. She wrote it plain. Homestead patent on file, year unknown, meridian fence in question, request old survey and any note on boundary stones. Back home, the porch turned school by degrees. Mercy planed a piece of scrap for a slate, rubbed it with soot and tallow, and chalked 2 careful lines. Hank's kids drifted by like snowflakes that meant to land. She traced letters with a glove tip and let them copy, breath smoking little vowels into the air. Blue lay across the threshold and took attendance with his tail. When the cold began to lean too hard, they went in. Boone's knuckles had cracked under the day, clean white lines that bled the way winter bleeds. Slow, stubborn. Mercy heated water to just warm, wrapped his hands with Mrs. June's rags, then rubbed a fingertip of tallow along each split. Boone held still as a post, eyes on the stovepipe, letting himself be fixed. The house went quiet enough to hear the flue tick. Mercy hummed without deciding to, a Red River lullaby in a key made for mending. Boone joined on the low line. Two voices, one song, the kind you use to talk a room back from the edge. Tin coffee passed between them, handle to palm, a small ceremony that didn't need words. Outside, the posts they set shouldered the wind like they'd meant to all along. Close to dark, hooves slushed at the gate. Mr. Bixby's runner boy, not the bootblack kid but his cousin by the look, stamped on the porch and handed Mercy a slip with the county's thin reply. They read it at the table, shoulders touching but not making a matter of it. "Survey records, incomplete," the wire said, and then the door it left open. Early markers noted, stone, at original line, may persist beneath drift. Boone summed the paper flat with 2 fingers. Mercy let out a breath that had been waiting since the mercantile. Work had brought them to a place the law could find. "Buried," Boone said, voice easy for the first time that day, but not gone. Mercy folded the message and slid it under the salt box where it couldn't wander. She looked at his wrapped hands, at the shovel against the door, at the cold already collecting its dues outside, and she thought of a stone keeping its mark under honest weather. The house held the warmth they had earned. Blue groaned like a floorboard and rolled onto his back, paws in the air, the belly of a dog who knows he belongs. Mercy laughed once, quiet, and reached down to scratch the fur where the white meets the blue. The laugh stayed in the room after the sound went. Tomorrow there would be snow to move and a marker to dig. Tonight there was song left in the stove and the kind of silence that stitches 2 people into the same page. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Night came in hard, the kind that filed every edge sharp. Wind hounded the eaves and shouldered the door like a drunk, asking the same question again. Mercy set the shovel near the threshold, checked the calf blankets Mrs. June had cut down, and hooked the salt box back over the wire reply so it wouldn't go wandering in a draft. Boone looked at the sky. Once, reading it like a ledger, then banked the stove to an orange hush. The storm hit full, dry snow hissing across the yard like spilled sand. Somewhere in that hiss a wrong light woke, thin and hungry at first, then flaring quick along the outer straw stack by the lean-to. Mercy felt the heat before she saw it, a lick against her cheek that didn't belong. She froze, breath held tight in her chest, while the brain tried to throw 3 bad choices at once. 1, she told herself. The word made room for the next breath. 2, she grabbed the shovel. 3, she yanked the door and the wind tore it wide. The room's warmth fell out in a sheet. She ran into the howl. Sparks chased the ground like nettles. Blue shot past on a line, old as he was, and shoved his chest against a bawling calf's shoulder until the little bull took the hint and backed into the rock pen. Mercy hit the drift with the shovel, scooped heavy wet snow, and dumped it right where the straw licked up the post. The flame sagged, hissed, then leapt sideways as fire does when it thinks it can outsmart you. Boone was there, no coat, just a flannel shirt and raw neck, a water bucket in each hand. He threw one hard, smothered a tongue of flame, and went for the next. A coal leapt high and caught him at the forearm. The stink of singed hair cut through the night. He didn't swear. He flattened the coal with his palm and the heel of his hand like pinning a mouse, then kicked the clutch of hot straw away from the fence with one clean boot sweep. "Keep it up," he said, voice low enough to be steady inside the roar. Mercy jammed the shovel again and again, packing snow into the mouth of it till it quit speaking. The wind tried to feed the rest. She moved against it, body to weather, learned by inches where the drift held and where it would betray her. Blue hustled another calf under the low lintel. Mercy swung the stall door bar down and felt the timbers take the strain. Behind her something heavy went wrong. A bale shouldered itself off the stack and broke bad. The outer roof popped smoke from the crease. then gave a gulpy breath of flame. Boone shouldered past with a tangle of wet sacking, beat the ridge flat till the orange went black, then took a long moment with his hands on his knees while the steam came up off him like a ghost. They lost the smallest one, the calf they'd called Little Nickel, because of the moon-white coin on his forehead. The wind went through him firmer than their blankets could argue. Mercy knelt, her soaked glove hanging from 2 fingers, and set her palm against his still warmth. She didn't stay long, not because sorrow was small, but because the living were calling. Go, she told herself, and she went. The worst of it passed in a hard 10 minutes that took 20 years. After, the flames lay down into sullen coals, and then into nothing at all. Mercy's arms hummed with the weight of work. Her breath made a rackety sound she didn't recognize until she named it. Fear leaving by the fastest door it knew. Boone stood off to one side, cradling his scorched forearm like a man who remembers where his skin is. He flexed his fingers. The burn had raised, angry but clean. Mercy was on him before words. She stripped the soaked glove off the other hand and wrapped his burn in a strip torn from her kerchief, then another from a calf blanket's edge. Not tight, she said, more to herself than him, but sure. He watched her work like he watched weather, alert, accepting. When she tied the last knot, he breathed out and let the arm hang. Snow ticked off the brim of his hat. The night had gone back to gray. You kept 'em breathin', he said, hoarse with smoke. That wins the night. Mercy didn't trust her mouth, so she nodded. Back at the threshold, she barred the door and felt the wood answer her, solid as a handclasp. Blue came in last, shook once, and left a spray on the floor they didn't bother to wipe. Inside, Mercy poured a little water in a pan and floated the coals one by one till each went honest dead. Boone set his burned arm on the table and let the stove talk to the rest of him. Little Nickel lay out under a drift. Tomorrow they'd do right by him and by the fence. Mercy stood there, steam coming off her sleeves, the kerchief knotting Boone's skin under her hands, and knew this about the night. Fire had tried its say, and so had wind, and both had been told no. Trust didn't arrive with a speech. It took a chair near the stove, put its hat on its knee, and stayed. Morning came milk gray, the yard soft with new fall. They did right by Little Nickel first. Under the lee of the shed, a prayer without words. A shovel laid across the mound, till the snow took the shape kindly. Then Boone slid the spade into its loop, Mercy shouldered the short shovel, and they walked toward the meridian fence, blue ghosting ahead and back like a thought that wouldn't leave you. Voss was already there with a thin lawyer in a fox collar, a rectangle of paper held like it could warm them. Frost lay on the rails. Voss's gloved hand looked steady enough until he took the glove off to point. Then the tremor showed, a skitter of pride and hunger under the deed. He said nothing big. He didn't need to. The lawyer cleared his throat the way men do when they want to be taller. Behind Mercy and Boone, the country answered. Neighbors came quiet, Hank Waverly carrying a Dutch oven by a rag-wrapped bale, Mrs. June with a pan of cornbread tucked in her shawl, the cornbread widow herself, 2 ranch wives, with lids clamped down against the cold. They didn't stand close, they took the wind on their coats and made a line of eyes. No rifles, just witness and hot food breathing in the air. Deputy Wade Harlan stepped over the bottom wire, set a board across 2 posts for a desk, and opened his notebook with the slow assurance of a man whose pencil makes things real. "All right," he said, voice level. "County can speak in its time. Today we mark what we got. Folks, fence, and the truth between." Boone nodded once toward the drift that had a different look, as if snow remembered a shape under it. Mercy took the shovel and drove it in. The blade rode soft a foot, then balked with a sound you can't mistake, stone speaking through wood and iron. She cleared careful, scraping with the edge, letting the snow slide away until the top of a rock showed, a flat cap cut long ago. She knelt, thumbed away ice, and the mark came up plain, 3 chisel strokes crossing a bar, the way Boone's father signed things that needed to last. No one cheered. Wade came over and touched the cut with a mittened knuckle, the way you greet an elder. He tipped his hat to the rock, habit taught by hard land, and then to the line of neighbors. He wrote a sentence that would hold, then said the only one he needed out loud. A fence remembers, folks do too. The lawyer started in about surveys and rods and a map that didn't bend for stones. Wade didn't rise to the bait. He took a canvas satchel, slid inside a rubbing mercy made with charcoal and paper, added a note of names and a time, and crimped a soft lead seal with a small set of pliers that wore his star. Evidence, he said, as if that word could throw its own shadow. Mercy rocked back on her heels, and the edge of the stone nicked her knuckle. Blood beaded red as a hollyberry in the white. Boone reached for her hand without hurry, wrapped it with a clean strip he'd cut from a feed sack, and tied it off with a square knot a sailor would have approved. He didn't look up to see if anyone watched. He made the hand right and let it go. Hank set the Dutch oven on a flat of snow. Mrs. June split the cornbread open with a bone-handled knife, and steam rose sweet into the morning. The crowd didn't speak their verdict. They ladled it. A spoon went to Wade first, then to Boone, then, because Mercy had dug the truth up with her own arms, to her. Voss took nothing. The lawyer took air. Wade shut his book. Provisional, he said, mostly to the paper. Stone and witnesses hold for now. County'll get its say, but I ain't moving a line off a rock a good man set with his own hand, unless a judge tells me different. He slid the sealed satchel into his coat like a rib added to his side. Voss stood with his coat buttoned too tight. He stared at the stone as if it had cheated him personally. The tremor ran once more along his fingers and hid. He looked up, scanned all those faces, men and women with snow in their lashes and work on their boots, and he found nothing he could buy there. He leaned in just enough so the wind wouldn't take it and said, "Ain't over." Mercy blew on her knuckles once and let her hand fall easy at her side. The bandage had already picked up a bit of charcoal. She met him the way you meet weather you've decided to live through. Me neither. The neighbors drifted off in ones and twos, leaving heat in the air where the food had been, leaving tracks that overlapped until you couldn't say whose foot had argued for what. Wade tipped his hat to the stone, then to Mercy. Blue paced a circle, satisfied with the shape of the morning. Boone set his palm on the post above the marker, not a claim, just a greeting. The wind came thin and mean across the fence and kept going. Mercy tasted cornbread gone a little sweet with steam, and thought how some things hold because hands keep holding them, day after mortal day. By afternoon the sky had the clean look of weather spent. Boone climbed the lean-to with a hammer and a pocket of nails. Mercy held the ladder and passed up shingles cut from a soundboard. Each tap set a small order against what the night had tried. When he climbed down, the roof held a new line, plain and right. Smoke from the stove threaded the cold and didn't blow back. The porch turned to school proper, without anybody saying the word. Hank's kids came first, then 2 more, faces raw from wind, mittens slick with tallow. Mercy wiped the slate with a heel of bread and drew letters steady, her glove off so the chalk could hear her. They sounded them out, one by one, breath making little clouds that wanted to be words. Blue lay crosswise at the threshold, like a bar dropped, tail thumping attendance. When the lesson let out, the bootblack kid from town shuffled up shy, hat in both hands. The cornbread widow stood behind him, eyes bright, as if the porch light had climbed into them. The kid cleared his throat and set a small thing in Mercy's palm, a silver button, polished, near white. For your bell, he said, not looking up, so's we know when it's time. Mercy felt the coin weight of it, the edge warm from someone else's pocket. She looked at the widow, who only shrugged the way a person does when they've decided to spend their luck on something that will outlast them. Thank you, Mercy said, the words simple as bread. She tied the button to a strip of rawhide and tapped it on the porch post. The sound was light but certain. The children grinned and ran, leaving prints that overlapped like good neighbors' tracks. Mr. Bixby's runner came next, blowing like a colt. Mercy broke the wire open with a thumb. Denies claim for now, stone and witnesses accepted. She read it once to herself and once to Boone, whose shoulders let go of a weight you don't know you're carrying till it leaves. He set the paper on the table and smoothed it flat with 2 fingers, same way he'd settled a fretful horse. Dusk shouldered in. Inside, Mercy fed the stove. Small splits first, so the iron would say yes, then a longer stick to hold the hour. She hung her frayed handkerchief on a nail where the steam could find it. Coffee hissed soft when she settled the pot by the lamp. The room took on that stove gold square again, the measure by which a place begins to believe in you back. Boone stood a long time at the shelf above the stove where the silver M button had lived like a star no one pointed out. He took it down without a speech and crossed the room slow. He set it in Mercy's hand beside the new gift, the 2 small circles catching the lamp in different tempers, one bright with present use, one worn honest by years. Mary's, he said, and the name rode quiet. Not to replace anybody. He closed Mercy's fingers over both, steady as a promise. To call supper. Mercy didn't answer quick. She let the past sit its chair, hat on its knee, welcomed it without asking it to eat first. Then she looped the M to the same rawhide, the 2 buttons touching like old friends who didn't need talk. She walked to the door and rang them once. The sound was hardly any sound at all, but Blue came right up, and Boone turned as if that note had always been his clock. They ate at the table, bowls warming their hands. Between spoon and spoon, Mercy looked through the window at the yard. Posts standing where they were set, the meridian fence running true into blue dusk. The mound over Little Nickel smoothed by a kind drift. She took a breath and felt the room answer, the way a room does when it has decided to keep you. Boone rinsed the bowls and set them upside down, edges catching lamplight. He stood in the doorway to the porch, listening to the air the way a man listens to stock at night. Snow fell easy again, flakes big as dimes, not in a hurry. Mercy joined him, their shoulders touched, not by accident. Boone spoke low, the sentence made for walls and winter. Home's the place the cold stops at the threshold. The words went out, struck the drift, and came back warmer. Mercy thumbed the buttons once and hung them by the door, where they could find her hand without looking. She reached down and scratched blue where the white meets the blue, the spot that makes his eyes go soft. He rolled to his side and sighed, the kind of sigh that forgives a weather. On the porch, the school slate leaned against the rail, chalk dust making a pale moon where her palm had been. Tomorrow she'd draw new lines. Tonight the house wore its smoke straight, the fence remembered its story, and the town's noise was somebody else's problem. Snow kept its peace. Inside, the lamp held steady, and where the light met the floor, you could see the stitching, not thread, but people, pulling winter back together by hand. When the stove burns low and the porch school goes quiet, you can almost hear that little silver button ring. Supper soft as Mercy, sure as a fence post set true. Maybe that's the whole trail of it. Some hurts thaw slow, some hands hold fast, and home's where the cold stops outside. If a moment stayed with you, the night fire, the stone marker, Blue's old dog sigh, tell me. Keep it simple. Comment 0 if Mercy's grit warmed you. Comment 1 if Boone's quiet kindness did. Feeling both? Drop 01. Tap subscribe and ring the silver bell so you don't miss the next ride. More snow, more stove gold, more Old West stories that stitch folks back together by hand. Saddle up in the comments. I'm listening.